And going back to, the early 80s there, God knows what it would be today.
That's about 10x. I'd say that's about 10x in today's
Yeah,
value.
probably. And, we, it was very different because San Fernando Valley was basically, at best, you had an apartment building, with 3 stories. So it was no big deal because I was used to wiring apartment buildings with 50 or 60 or 70 stories in Manhattan. So in LA, we built horizontally, and when I was in Manhattan, we built vertically um, and stuff. But the basic principles were pretty much the same.
So a lot of doggone cable.
Yeah, enough to go around the earth several times, I think.
Was the cable made in the U.S. at that time?
Yeah, cable was made in the U.S. They were actually made in Pennsylvania.
Wow. Steel Town.
Yep.
Okay. So you may not know this about me,
Yeah,
Larry, but
we originally called it Movie Time because we focused on movies, but then we realized that MTV was doing music then, that we could claim the rest of the entertainment world, so we changed the name to E, and gave us a broader palette to paint across.
and even allowed you to do music if you wanted to.
Yeah, we would cover music typically. We weren't there about showing music videos, but we did have a show about movie music and things like that. So we covered music, but we weren't just about somebody who works for me like insult him. Why would in the world would this guy want to see me? And they said get in the car, and I'm like, oh God, they're gonna kill me in the car. I said it's like a scene out of The Godfather, and we drive through to the main building and we get to customs, the passport control, and there's like an hour long wait. They just walk us up to the front and they go, he's with us, and we just go walk through and stuff like that. But then, 8 o'clock, I come out of the hotel to.
Good day. Welcome to the Dr. Smiley Show. I am so excited to be with this guest. I've met him several times, and it's kind of a pinch yourself. You get to have him on the show. So, welcome, Larry Namer.
Hi, hey, great to be here. Should be fun.
Yeah, I met you a couple times at Secret Knock, and Greg Reed does bring some of the coolest people in the world there. And I came over, got a shot of you with a smile card, took your phone number and asked, man, would you be willing to be on the Dr. Smiley Show? And here's the thing, I pick people that move me, that cause me to say, wow, this is how I want to be inspired by someone who's a hero, a business person, an honest person, a person who thinks outside the box. So uh, thank you so much for the book. This
Yeah.
book was given to me at Secret Knock, and it's called Never Follow the Crowd: Recipes for Success. Visionary founder of E Entertainment TV network, Larry J. Namer. What does J stand for?
Jay.
JY. Okay. Well, I'm a James. That's why I was curious. So you've always had it easy, Larry. I mean, you pretty much had the E network handed to you. You didn't really have to do any work, basically.
Yeah, and all that Dad was a Pepsi Cola driver, so we had all this generational wealth.
Right, right. So, what caused you to go to Secret Knock? How do you know Greg Reed?
We actually met when Greg was doing, he was actually trying to do a movie called Wishman.
Yes.
And, it was about the guy who started Make-A-Wish Foundation, Frank. And, I've been, reasonably successful in the media business. So somebody suggested that we meet. And the subject of, Make-A-Wish Foundation was especially relevant to me since my oldest son John is actually a wish kid. He was diagnosed with brain cancer, and he's a miracle kid. He's still hanging around and being annoying. But Make a Wish Foundation did loads of great stuff for my kids, so I figured I had to give back a little.
So the context for that audience is that Frank Shankwitz, one, has been on my show. He is a superhero, cowboy hat, Arizona patrol guy who had an amazing story that an accident caused him to kind of look at life differently. He was given a chance to, um, I guess, inspire a kid who wanted to be a patrol officer himself, who had leukemia. And he said, I want to give a wish to him. And so he made a wish. He gave the wish of him being a patrol officer. And Next thing you know, gosh, it's been 500,000 wishes, if I recall, $7,000 a wish. And it was all because he came up with this idea, went to Secret Knock, and Greg Reed said, "You've made wishes for everybody. How about I make a wish for you? What would that be?" He says, "I'd love to have my story told." So if those two things hadn't happened, we may not know each other. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it's good. You never know who you'll meet at Secret Knock. It's a great event every year.
Well, your book is just one thing I was pleasantly surprised about is you got some color in here. I mean,
Yeah.
because the book is really just loaded with great information. So we're going to extract as much as we possibly can in the time we have together. I always like to know and have the audience know that this was not just a situation where your dad was a Pepsi driver. He hit the lotto ticket and said, "Hey, son, you want to go to China and start to be a mogul in the entertainment industry?" So, would you share how your childhood was and where you were born?
Sure. I was born in Coney Island, Brooklyn, New York, um, way before Brooklyn became trendy Brooklyn. Now, a lot of it is being gentrified and stuff. But when I grew up, Brooklyn was far from gentrified, and Coney Island is still the hood. Um, the family, very um, multiracial, multi-ethnic community, Coney Island was, and um, basically immigrant stock, all working people. My dad drove a Pepsi Cola truck, and he would deliver soda to the supermarkets and restaurants. And my mother worked for the Department of Social Services in New York City. So, both working parents, and uh, we lived in a little two-bedroom apartment. There were three kids, and so, mom and dad got one bedroom and kids all had another and, one bathroom. But, we all grew up thinking life was good, and we really didn't, we didn't realize we were poor because everybody around us was the same. And so, went to public schools, and I'm still friends with my high school friends. Um, more than anybody else, I relish that part of my life, and and relate to those people a lot more than I relate to Hollywood people. I hate to say, but so grew up pretty normal. Ended up graduating Brooklyn College with a degree in economics, and I quickly realized that there weren't a lot of jobs for economists out there. And so I ended up taking a job. My first job out of college was working for cable TV when nobody knew what cable TV was. I knew somebody in the electrical workers union who sent me to go see the shop steward of a new company that was building a cable system in Manhattan. And they gave me a job as an assistant underground splicer, um, which for $90 a week, which meant every day I would go under the streets of Manhattan with the roaches and the rats, and I'd just sit there and put the wires together until 5 o'clock when you get to come up and, hopefully take a shower and, and do all of that stuff. So yeah, it was a great childhood. We were out in the street all the time. We played sports, and, um, like I say, we didn't realize we were disadvantaged, and I don't think we were disadvantaged. I thought it was just a great way to grow up.
So you didn't really get to play video games, is what you're trying to tell me.
It was a little bit before video games and stuff. No, we actually played real sports. I played, all growing up, I played baseball, in the local leagues. And then in high school, I played high school football and stuff. And then in college, I played a little football until I realized that guys were a lot bigger and a lot stronger than me, and they would break my bones. So,
I find it funny that you studied economics and it wasn't an economically friendly career to go into.
yeah, it was, I was thinking I'll either be an economist or a teacher. And I quickly realized after doing a little bit of student teaching that teaching was certainly not for me. And then economists, I mean, there was nothing out there that was for economists. So, I needed to get a job. So I took what I thought would be a temporary job. And again, $90 a week was, when I look back on it, I'm kind of amazed that anybody would pay anybody $90 a week. But yeah, no, it was all good.
And Coney Island, I mean, famous for the dogs, right?
Famous for the hot dogs. I'm still a big Nathan's hot dog person. Whenever I go fly into New York, if I land at Kennedy, I have the car just take me to Coney Island. I get some hot dogs and stuff like that.
Are you saying that Nathan's is the originator of? I mean, one of the original Coney Island dogs?
It was actually Feltman's was the original, and Nathan Handwerker worked at Feltman's, and then when he left, he started his own place, which is Nathan's, and then the family actually sold it. It's now a big public company,
It's
and
huge.
yeah, it's huge all over the place and stuff. I've been back to the original Coney Island one, and the hot dogs are still spectacular, and the French fries, but it's become a little more like a fast food chain. I mean, it's kind of like a franchise thing now. But the hot dogs and the French fries are still right on.
Well, I'm sure there's other things we can talk about in your book, but I'm just a bit fascinated with this. So, can we hang here for a minute or two?
Sure.
Okay. So, uh, are you familiar with the only New York systems in Rhode Island? It's called the Coney. It's the New York system, and they sell it in Rhode Island, and it's got the special sauce and all that good stuff.
No, not
Okay.
familiar at all.
Well, I'll take a plane ride from DC to Rhode Island just to go to a couple of Coney Island places, just because it's that addictive. Those dogs are amazing, and I didn't know Nathan's was a product of Coney Island. So that's the first thing I'm learning is like a boo, and
Yeah.
and they have crushed it. And some people go, how are they making any money? They're only selling the hot dogs for $11 or $12 at an airport.
Yeah, well, they're a little bigger than that. You can get them in almost every
Oh
supermarket
yeah.
now.
Oh, they're huge. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean that is our choice too. All right, so from that job you got the job the $9, was that a necessary step for you to take your next steps and meet the right people to?
Yeah, well, I took it thinking it was going to be temporary until I figure out what I want to do with my life and what you do with an economics degree. And it was interesting because very quickly um, I learned how to use all the equipment. And they would say to me, "Hey, kid, it usually takes people 2 years to learn the equipment. And you learned it in 2 weeks. How did you do that?" And my answer was very well. I read the instruction booklet. I mean, I didn't find it to be rocket science. So, I started, I was an assistant splicer, then I became a splicer, and then I became they moved me to being a construction guy, which meant I climbed through the backyards of all the big buildings in New York. And then I became an installer, then a serviceman. But it was actually kind of interesting because then Time Incorporated bought the company, and at that point, Time was a publishing company. It had
Hmm.
Time magazine and Life magazine, Sports Illustrated, and so you had all these Harvard and Yaleys now running the company, not really understanding what it is those guys do when they go under the streets every day. And there was actually a big contract negotiation, and the head of the union there said, "Hey, kid, you have a college degree. We want you to be on the negotiating committee." And I was like 23 years old, and I'm like, I don't know anything about negotiating labor contracts. And they went, "Well, go read a book," and which I literally did. And we had this negotiation, so you had all these guys who work under the ground negotiating against the Harvard and the Yaleys, and we had a pretty successful contract. And then afterwards, the union guy said to me, "Hey, we appreciate all the stuff you did." And they made me the vice chairman of the Cable TV Workers of America. So I was 23 years old, and I was like a vice chairman of a labor union, which was just nuts. And so I did that, and then finally, Timing put in one of their golden boys to be the president of Manhattan Cable, and he realized that I could be kind of this great interface between those guys in the street and the time anchors, and so he convinced me to move into management, which I did, and I think I was just 25, or maybe I just turned 26, where I ended up becoming the director of operations in Manhattan. So all those technical divisions that at one point I worked through, now all of a sudden reported to me. So, I was 25 years old and had 300 and some odd folks reporting to me, which was a great lesson in learning how to be a manager.
Right.
Because it wasn't easy because, just about everybody was older than me. And, they just looked at me as the kid. And, so you had to be tough and stuff like that. But it was a great training ground. So I ran that for a bunch of years. And then Timing decided they really wanted to expand their footprint in the cable business. And so they ended up making me director of corporate development, and my responsibility was finding new uses of cable television other than just providing entertainment. So I
Hmm.
got to start doing remote medical diagnostics and data transfer and all of this stuff. This is way before the internet. Um, so I was doing all this really heavy duty technical stuff, and um, it really did prepare me for, going forward beyond just my life at Manhattan Cable.
And then when did you move to LA?
Well, so here I was, running operations of Manhattan and, as director. And then right about 1980, all the big cities in the country began to realize that cable TV was going to be more than just a way to get good reception because it was basically rural and, people didn't have good reception. But they realized that it was now going to be a programming source in a way of transferring data up and down and stuff like that. So the city of Los Angeles issued a franchise to a Canadian company to build the first 61 channel two-way cable system, built in the United States. But it was interesting because the caveat was you couldn't put it on telephone poles. You had to build it underground. Well, the only person in the world who knew how you build underground cable systems was me. So, I was just turned 31. I think I got recruited to come out to LA and build this first big cable system. Um, and, so I did that. So I left New York and moved out to LA. And, it was kind of strange. On one hand, they said, here's the franchise from the city of LA, which is what you got to build. And here's, a credit line from Toronto Dominion Bank. And here's the money to build it. So now for the first time, not only did I have the technical departments, but finance reported to me, government relations reported to me, and more importantly, programming reported to me. So, and you're a Brooklyn kid and you go out to LA and you get to play with programming. It was kind of exciting and fun. And yeah, we got to do a lot of unusual stuff at Valley Cable, even to the point where Forbes magazine named us as the national model for cable programming.
Wow. So tell me about how monstrous this opportunity was as far as first of all the amount of cable that you're laying. I mean, what does that look like? Is that like a skyscraper building of filled with cable, and then also the budget?
Oh, well, the budget for, Valley Cable was around $400 million. And going back to, the early 80s there, God knows what it would be today.
That's about 10x. I'd say that's about 10x in today's
Yeah,
budget.
probably. And, we, it was very different because San Fernando Valley was basically, at best you had an apartment building, with 3 stories. So it was no big deal because I was used to wiring apartment buildings with 50 or 60 or 70 stories in Manhattan. So in LA, we built horizontally, and when I was in Manhattan, we built vertically um, and stuff. But the basic principles were pretty much the same.
So a lot of doggone cable.
Yeah, enough to go around the earth several times, I think.
Was the cable made in the U.S. at that time?
Yeah, the cable was made in the U.S. They were actually made in Pennsylvania.
Wow, Steel Town.
Yep.
Okay. So you may not know this about me, Larry, but I am an avid traveler. And at one point in my life, I decided to do a 10-year stint of visiting 100 countries, which I did. I did 101 to be exact. And when you told me about your travels, but more importantly, your acceptance by China and the trust they instilled in you, before we go there, that you have a chapter about Liberace and you. Can you let's just take a minute to go there before we go to China?
Sure. we're going back to the days where the climate in America was nobody would actually admit that Liberace was a gay man. They just thought he dressed funny. But Liberace had a house in L.A. that was actually on the beginning of Entertainment Tonight every night. It was part of their introduction to Entertainment Tonight, the video. But when I got invited to come out to LA to interview, I made it very clear to the Canadian company. I said, listen, I'm not interested in that job. I said, I'm a New Yorker. There's no way that I would ever move to California. I'm not doing it. And they just kept calling back and saying, oh, we really want to talk to you. And I said, look, as long as you realize that there's no way I'm going to take that job. I said, if you want to fly me out there, and you could do that. And they agreed. The chairman of the company kept saying, great, I'll put you up in the Bel Air Hotel and fly you out first class. And, you got to give me an hour. And, so I did it. And I made it very clear. I said, there's no way I'm taking this job. And, and I was a total idiot at the interview, and I'm, going, okay, you got, an hour starting now, you got 50 minutes left, you got 40 minutes left. And then finally, at the end of the interview, he said, well, this is all really good. He goes, what would it take for you to move out here? And, I just said, I named like four times what I made in New York. And I said, I understand they have these things called mobile phones now. This is before cell phones. I said, so I want you to rent me a car with a mobile phone. And I understand Liberace just moved to Las Vegas and his house in LA is open. I said, and I want you to rent that house for me. And the guy just looked at me and said, you're out of your mind. You're crazy. I went, exactly. I said, I told you there was no way I wanted this job. And anyway, long story short, after a few weeks, they decided that even though my asks were crazy, they decided that they were going to do it. So, I had my foot in my mouth, and they did pay me what I asked for, and they did get me the car with a mobile phone, and they rented Liberace's house for me, and I lived in the Liberace house with the piano-shaped swimming pool.
Yes, I've been there, by the way, Larry.
Oh, it's a great house.
Oh, it's phenomenal. I mean, it's like taking Versailles or some exotic place in Paris and just dumping it right in LA. It's
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, I did a mastermind, and we were able to be there for one day for one party and actually learn there, and it was pinch yourself kind of place. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, no, it was great. It was fun, and plus, to be able to show off to all my friends back in Brooklyn, where I was living. So it was good.
Awesome. So that took you next to Europe. I mean, how long ago was that?
Well, that was I was there, and then the company that I worked for, Canadian company, they sold out and they moved back to Toronto. And they said, "Oh, Larry, you're going to come up to Toronto, right?" And I went, no. I said, "There's no way I went from New York to LA to go to Toronto." I said, "That ain't going to happen." I said, "I'm done with cold." And so me and my friend Alan Marufka, who's from New Jersey, we said, he was going back and forth between LA and New York, and he wanted to stay in LA. And we just said, let's come up with an idea that would keep us in Los Angeles. And we came up with, again, we're back in the early days of cable. We said, let's do like MTV of the movies, because MTV was the music business, but nobody's covering movies and television, the rest of entertainment. And so we wrote a business plan, and we thought we were brilliant. And we didn't realize that every place we went, people said, listen, people don't start TV networks, only big media companies do that. And, 3.5 years later, nobody had given us any money. And we were like, okay, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. But when I was at Valley Cable, and again, everything reported to me, I get to do whatever I want. You're a Brooklyn kid, and you're in LA, and all your neighbors and people are going to parties and premieres and meeting celebrities and stuff. And I called the studios and said, hey, put me on those lists. And they were like, yeah, you're like a utility, like the phone company or the gas company, and they wouldn't put me on the invite list. And finally, I met somebody in marketing, and I said, I'm really confused by the way you guys do business. I said, the most effective marketing vehicle you have for any movie is a movie trailer. I said, but yet the only time I ever see a movie trailer is when I'm already in the movies. I said, wouldn't you want me to see that when I'm at home to make me want to go to the movies? And they went, yeah, but it's too expensive. I said, tell you what, I got 61 channels and I don't know what to put on. I said, you send me those trailers and I'll put them on TV for free, but you put me on the list. And they went, sure, and they did. And when we started doing kind of subscriber audience surveys. What's your favorite channel? They go, oh, we love CNN, we love ESPN, we love that trailer channel. I just filed that in the back of my head. I said, that's weird. I'm getting the best 2 minutes of a $50 million movie for free, and people are loving it. And then when Alan and I were playing around, he said, it's really weird if you look at MTV, you look at cable as being an electronic newspaper. Um, you have CNN as the headline, the ESPN as the sports page. The thing that was missing, obviously, was the entertainment pages.
Hmm.
And I said, wait a second. I said, MTV stands a host in front of a green screen and says, hey, and Madonna has a new video. I said, we could stand a host in front of a green screen and go, hey, and Schwarzenegger has a new movie. So that's kind of how that thinking started. And again, we didn't realize that nobody was going to give us any money. Everyone said nice idea, but then when we were like 3.5 years in, somebody introduced us to a young guy who was just taken over investment banking for what was a bond house on Wall Street, and we met with the guy, and he said, I really love this and I want to do it. And I said, great. I said, when can we get the check for 100 million? And he went, oh, no, no, no. He goes, I'm only allowed to sign for 2.5. And I'm like, well, what are we supposed to do with 2.5? I mean, it costs like $100 million to start a TV network. And finally, Alan and I just looked at each other and said, you know what? Fine, we'll take the 2.5. And I had a friend that was teaching radio, television, and film at University of Texas in Austin. And I called him up and said, hey, Brian, do you have a bunch of kids that need uh, intern jobs? And he goes, yeah, we had a hard time placing kids this year. I said, send me all you got. And so he actually sent us 31 interns.
Hmm.
And people don't realize because he is it's a monster today, 142 countries and arguably the biggest influence of pop culture in the world. But he started with 11 employees and 31 interns and $2.5 million.
That is definitely thinking outside the box. So that is the E network beginning.
That was the E Network beginning.
And E stood for entertainment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we originally called it Movie Time because we focused on movies, but then we realized that MTV was doing music then, that we could claim the rest of the entertainment world. So we changed the name to E, and gave us a broader palette to paint across.
And even allowed you to do music if you wanted to.
Yeah. We would cover music typically. We weren't there about showing music videos, but we did have a show about movie music and things like that. So we covered music, but we weren't just about music.
And then international.
Yeah, and then I began to realize that Hollywood was becoming less and less of a geographic place, but really was becoming kind of a mindset. It was a good measure of creativity. It was a measure of quality, but the need to have to come to Hollywood to make visual entertainment was becoming less and less. Again, when I first got in, you needed huge sound stages and cameras that were like $250,000 for a camera. But as technology kept bringing down the cost, I said, people could start making visual entertainment anywhere in the world. You don't have to be in Hollywood. So, and that's really what got us out there to start really focusing on building the international markets. Of course, we realized that we weren't about the Hollywood of entertainment, we were about the world of entertainment. And, I started doing a lot of stuff around the world. And then eventually I met some, well, a lawyer friend of mine um, had some clients that were uh, doing business in what was then the Soviet Union, and somebody proposed an entertainment deal to them, or a media deal. And he said, Larry, will you go over with them and tell me if you think this is real? And I was like, well, go to the Soviet Union. Yeah, of course, I'll do that. And
What year was that?
89.
So you're talking real Russia.
Oh, yeah, it was so still Soviet Union when I
Yeah,
was there.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
I went through the coup and the whole thing there, the Gorbachev days and the Yeltsin days and all of that. And
Where the souvenir shops had less toys than a 7-Eleven.
oh yeah, and the stands on the corner would be a dried fish and a pack of Marlboro, and
Right.
that was about it. Um, but I became fascinated with the place, and the mayor of St. Petersburg asked me to help him start a charity to raise money for the children's orphanage and the children's hospital, which we started this thing called the White Nights Festival, and every year between June 16th and 21st, we would raise 100% of the budget for the hospital and the orphanage by
Yeah, I
doing.
remember that. I remember you sharing that at Secret Knock. Did the mayor of St. Petersburg, did he have a translator, or did he actually speak English, or how did you guys communicate?
The mayor of St. Petersburg spoke pretty decent English. He was a lawyer named Anatoly Sobchak, and but with the festival, I would always have to promise people all kinds of things in order to get them to come and play for free
Right.
or greatly discounted rates. And but I would tell the mayor, and the mayor would go, "Yeah, Larry, whatever you need, it's fine. Just go tell the vice mayor I said it's okay." Well, the vice mayor was this guy named Vladimir Putin. You may have heard of him. He's been in the news lately.
Yeah.
So I worked closely with him on getting venues and stages and electricity and all of that kind of stuff. And then when he ended up in the Kremlin, he realized that in order to build a consumer economy, that you need to kind of reshape media to make it look a little bit more familiar to Western marketers, particularly the luxury good guys, the Gucci's and the Pradas and
Hmm.
all that. So they asked me to work with the Minister of Communications to help rewrite regulatory policy there, which was pretty simple. It was like TV ads are 30 seconds or 60 seconds that weren't whatever you feel like today. Um, so it's pretty standardized. So I did that for them. And then it's a bunch of years later, um, the Chinese kind of realized that they had to do media reform too if they wanted to develop this consumer economy. And they liked the Russian model. They went to the Russians, and the Russians said, "Oh no, here's this guy in LA who worked with us on doing it." And so I ended up getting called by the Chinese to come there, and so I did that. And then they asked me to work with young TV executives, helping them in that transition from 100% Communist Party dominated media to something a little bit more relaxed. And so I did that. And then, they just said, why don't you start a media company here so we could learn from you? And I went, well, you don't allow Western media companies in here. And they went, well, we don't like the ones we don't like. We don't allow the ones we don't like. And I said, why are you going to be so happy, so kind to me? And they said, it's really simple. We have a fight with Rupert Murdoch. It's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. We have a fight with you. We go out for drinks. We scream and yell at each other, but the next day we're good. They go, for now, we'd rather do it that way. So that's how I got involved in China. So they set us up to be an experimental company. And we've been an experiment in China for 14 years now.
40,
14.
14, 14 years. So I can't imagine what it would have been like to go into Russia or China and have this opportunity. Can you paint the brush a little thicker? Like, did you feel danger ever? Were they so hospitable? And did they have two sides of them where they talked about how they would love the US, or they didn't like the US and things like that?
No, when Russia was interesting because when it first changed, um, the the there was a great love for the U.S. People would say, the United States is what we would have been if it wasn't for the damn communists.
Hmm.
Um, so there was this great friendliness there. I think that we, as a government, got real cocky, and we just started saying, "Oh, we're going to send in consultants from Harvard, and they'll tell them what to do." We didn't really treat it right, and that kind of, was there was a backlash to it. But for me, yes, it was unbelievably dangerous. Um, but again, I was a Coney Island street kid, so I was used to gang fights and all of that stuff. So I wasn't terribly scared there. But 1998, there were 28 bankers that were murdered on the streets of Moscow. I mean,
Right.
literally, just if you didn't feel like pay your loan, just go and shoot the banker. Um, it was pretty crazy. But I had a very big TV show there. I started doing programming, and so I had a TV show there, a soap opera, which was became a phenomenon. We were the number one TV show in Russia for 11 years. Um,
What was the name of it?
Santa Barbara was a soap opera,
Okay.
and it was this cultural phenomenon, and everybody would watch it. Literally, stores would close between 7 and 8 o'clock at night, so the women in the shop could watch the show. They would literally lock the door and let people line up in the street. And but so everybody loved the show, and then you had the bad guys, the Russian mafia guys who all their girlfriends loved the show. So, they would see me sitting in a restaurant and they'd come over and go, Larry, tell us what happens to whatever character next week so I can impress my girlfriend. And I go like, no, I can't do that. And they go, well, even though there are food shortages, we could get tomatoes. And I went, really? Okay, you bring me tomatoes, I'll tell you what happened. Um, and so, we became um, kind of friendly,
Right.
not business friendly, but just we had this relationship where they just realized we weren't carpetbaggers and we weren't looking to make a quick buck there and stuff like that. And then one time, I mean, it's a crazy, crazy story, but I land in St. Petersburg, and then the planes didn't come right up to the terminal. The planes parked out on the runway, and you had to take a little bus to the terminal.
Right.
So we land, and I see cars pull up to the plane, and I'm getting off the plane. I see these guys, with like twisted ears and twisted noses, Armani suits, and you could tell that they were packing. And I come down. They go, "Are you Larry Namer?" I went, "Yeah, why?" And they go, Mr. Bisasha Big, who was the head of the whole thing, needs to see you tonight. Come with us. And I'm like, oh my God, why did somebody who works for me like insult him? Why would in the world would this guy want to see me? And they said get in the car, and I'm like, oh God, they're gonna kill me in the car. I said this is like a scene out of The Godfather, and we drive through to the main building, and we get to customs, the passport control, and there's like an hour long wait. They just walk us up to the front, and they go, he's with us, and we just go walk through and stuff like that. But then, 8 o'clock, I come out of the hotel to meet this main guy, and he just says to me, I mean, this guy's like a known killer, and he says, I need a favor. And I'm like, yeah, whatever you need, of course. I mean, I'm like shaking. And, finally he says, he goes, my mother is the biggest fan of that TV show that you do. And I understand that one of the stars are coming here to St. Petersburg to be at your festival. Is there any way you can introduce my mother? And I'm like, really? I go, and so it ends up I introduce the mom who was a school principal, and he just came to me after and he said, "You made my mother very happy. I never forget." Um, and literally, they just went around all of St. Petersburg with my picture and every restaurant, every nightclub going, "This is a friend of Sasha. If he's drunk at 3 o'clock in the morning, your job is to get him home safely. If he as much as hits a bump in a taxi cab, you're going to have to answer for that." And like I was perfectly safe.
Yeah, that's quite a story. I thought you were going to build it up that the mafia guy was going to say, "What'd you do with all those tomatoes?"
Yeah, right.
I brought that up with a broader stroke because not everyone knows this, but there are a lot of business people that thought they were going to make their riches in Russia because they needed a Russian partner in order to do
Yeah.
business there, and they go with the money and they don't come back. And
It was a rough time for a lot of people.
yeah, and it's so funny that you could be this super successful person in the U.S. and you think this is going to be your international break, and that's the last day of your life. It's the kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there was like I say, 28 bankers murdered on the streets of Moscow, and you take a loan and if you didn't feel like paying it back, you just shot the banker.
right, yeah, I'm glad we went there because I don't want everyone to just think you went from eating the best hot dogs to Liberace to bada bang, bada boom. You're the E network mogul. So China was different, obviously, but in what way?
Well, China, the biggest difference in China, and people always ask me the question is, I said in Russia, if I make a mistake, I could lose my life. In China, if I make a mistake, I could lose some money. I mean, it was very, very different in the way that they protected foreigners and
Hmm.
particularly foreign business people. I mean, it was just known that, doing kind of like white collar crime was not a bad thing, but don't ever hurt a foreigner because Chinese government just didn't like that. They didn't want that going around. So, I mean, I had an apartment there. I go out of my apartment at 2 o'clock in the morning to go get street food or whatever. And just, you felt safer there than you feel any place else in the world. I mean, even still, um, no
What
guns.
city? What city do you live in?
Beijing.
It was Beijing. Okay.
Yeah.
And did you travel all over China?
Yeah, we travel all over China. We still, we're still there. We're still got a company there, and we do whether it be TV shows or concert tours and stuff all over China. We're actually just in the process of signing a contract to do Trek the musical,
Oh yeah.
um, to bring it to China. I mean, 16-week tour there, and we do concerts and we do a lot of immersive things. Here in the U.S., we've had immersive Van Gogh and Klimt and 100 Years of Disney. We actually buy the rights for China for those things, and so we do stuff all over.
One of my favorite place. I don't know if you went there, Xi'an, China, with the terracotta warriors.
I love Xi'an, and as a matter of fact, next year we're actually shooting a TV series called Empress about the first and only woman to rule China. But we're shooting it in English with American-born Chinese, Canadian-born Chinese. But we're shooting the interiors in Vancouver, and we're shooting the exteriors in Xi'an.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's so cool. I was awakened by going to, of all places, a community college. Howard Community College was very rich in language. They taught something like almost 20 languages, and
Wow.
I took 13 just so when I traveled to these countries, I could at least be polite. And you get invited to these festivals, like the Japanese festival or the whatever festival, and it is a world that their entertainment, you've never heard of any of it. You've never heard of any of their pop stars. You've never heard of any of their influencers, and you say, "Wow, I know nothing."
Yeah. Well, I think now you're starting to see the changes. I mean, where, just look at K-pop and stuff, which is penetrated heavily into North America now. I mean, there are fans of K-pop that are not Asian people. And, if you just look at China, the number one music genre in China is K-pop, followed by American, followed by J-pop, which is Japanese. So
Yeah.
it's becoming a very different world, much smaller world than we imagine.
And where are you right now, Larry?
I'm in Los Angeles, and I go back and forth between LA and New York. And more recently, since post-COVID, I have a lot of friends that moved to Miami, so I spend a lot of time in Miami.
Well, if you ever need your, not, I shouldn't say need, if you're ever willing to have the Keep Smiling movement travel with you to capture some of these amazing people that bring smiles to the world, it would be my honor to be your wingman.
Sure, that'd be great.
So, is there anything else that I know we want to talk about the secret sauce, and you've kind of laid it in the stories, but let's just give maybe three or four Larry secret sauce that really causes anybody, young or old, to be at another level.
Yeah, I think, the book is somewhere between a memoir and a cookbook because I like cooking more than I like most other things. Um, but it's just a lot of it. Stay humble. Don't believe the good things people say about you. Don't believe the bad things say about it. It's really how do you feel about yourself
Hmm.
that matters. Um, uh, when pitching things, never say to anybody, just imagine, because you lose them at the just imagine point. What you have in your head, that picture that you have in your head for a business, it's yours and yours alone. And most people can't imagine what you're talking about. One of the things I learned when they put in a guy named Nicholas from Time Warner into Manhattan Cable, and which is really where I developed my management skills. And he was a tough guy. He was a really tough guy, but he always had this thing, and he would instill in me, Larry, you know what, no matter what you do, you got to be firm but fair. Everybody who works for you has to realize that they're being treated fairly. Even if you're like, pounding on them to do better and do more, they got to think it's been fair. Um, so those are kind of my main things. The other one that I tell people, and it's somewhat controversial, is whole thing of follow your passion. Um, I think if I followed my passion, I'd be a short order cook in a restaurant somewhere. Um, I think most people's passion is really a hobby. It's not necessarily a business. We all have the same needs to make enough money to pay the rent, to eat, to educate our kids, and stuff like that. So I always tell young people, I said, find something you're good at and then just work the heck out of it and become great at it. And then that will become your passion. And then when you make enough money from that, you then have the luxury of going back and doing all those things you love, like me cooking.
Hmm.
Um, if I had to worry about cooking to make the rent next month, it would be a problem. But I managed to do something else, which allows me to follow my passionate love of cooking and food.
Well, I have a lot of short questions, so this is kind of in the wrap up mode, but I do want to ask these questions because they're kind of cool. So one question is, instead of saying just imagine as a pitch, what is a good pitch line?
I always start with bringing to light kind of a contradiction or something that doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense to people. Like when we did it was when we used the electronic newspaper thing, and we said the second most read section of any Sunday newspaper is the entertainment pages, and it's missing from the cable universe.
Hmm.
Um, People had clicked right away. I mean, now I'm doing something, a new thing in the fashion world called Fashion Club, which we're actually headquartering in Miami now, literally just starting. Excuse me. And the one thing that's, when I explain it to people, if I were to say to you, if you love a rock band and you want to go to a concert, you go and buy a ticket, you go. But what if they all of a sudden they would turn around to you and say, well, you can't come to rock concerts anymore unless you are in a rock band. You go like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Or, you're a Laker fan and you want to go to a Laker game, you go and buy a ticket and you go to the Laker game. Well, what if all of a sudden they turned around and said, no, the only way you're allowed to go to a Laker game is you got to be in the NBA.
Hmm.
It makes no sense at all. It's a disconnect between the creative side and the consumer side. But then you look at the fashion world, and the only way that you get to go to fashion's highest events is you got to be in the fashion industry.
That's right.
It makes no sense whatsoever. So we're starting Fashion Club to be kind of the disruptor, where we're going to start doing these very, very high level fashion events that are only open to people who are not in the fashion industry.
Well, I would love that. And I am invited to fashion events because of my National Press Club and my camera. That's the reason why. But I certainly know what you're talking about. You have to have someone say you're in, that you're on the list, like
Yep.
you said. Um, I want to say, great freaking haircut, Larry.
Hey, I got a good barber.
So you were recently given an award that really touched your heart. I saw you accepted at the Secret Knock event. It was a patriotism award. You can share more of what it was and why that meant so much to you. But congratulations on that.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah, that was the thought of getting an award signed by a president is just in a million years, growing up in the way I did, you couldn't imagine. And I'm just sorry that my both mom and dad are gone and couldn't, they would have probably loved it much more than I did.
Well, you said that about your mom. I did hear that
Yeah.
part. And I'm a publisher because of my mom. She passed, and so we hopefully play bigger when we have someone that we love give us the message how precious life is. So
Yep.
I just want to say thank you. It touched everyone's heart in the room when you shared that. Um, how do people follow you, reach you? The next Miami event, is there an opening one?
We're planning it now. It's going to be in September.
Okay.
Be in Miami, but we don't have it locked in yet. We kind of got locked into what it is, but we're looking for the venue,
Okay.
and we're doing that. People could reach me. LJN at LJN Media is my email, or you can find me on Facebook is kind of my food blog. You can reach me on Facebook. I typically answer all that stuff every day, so.
Yeah, you're very good about that. And you can't use Facebook in China, though, can you?
I, well, legally, no, but if you know the right person there, they show you how to do it.
I understand. Okay, so you love to cook. What is your favorite dish you love to cook?
Well, when I'm trying to impress people, I'll cook Chinese food because I could cook Chinese food as good as any Chinese person on the planet now. Um, usually Chinese, Asian, or Mediterranean.
So I hope I'm okay saying this, but I went to China and I did not know that was Chinese food because
Totally different. Totally different. It,
100%.
um, you know, I think, most of us grew up on, particularly if you're from the Northeast, you grew up on Southern Chinese food, or as I like to refer to it as, New York Chinese, um, which has been bastardized over 150 years by people like my mom. Because we go to a Chinese restaurant and they go, "This is a good dish, but you should put peas in it." So over that 150 years, it's become different.
Yeah, that Chinese food we had over in China, that is legit.
Yeah.
And what we have over here is, well, it's a little like the pizza.
Yeah.
Okay. What dish do you like to get from? What's your favorite dish to eat that you don't cook?
Um, let's see. Well, my favorite restaurant is a fish restaurant in New York called the Bernardin, um, and stuff, and just elevates, you know, seafood dishes to an entirely different level. I love New York Italian food. It's probably my favorite. I could replicate it fairly closely, but I still love going back to New York and getting like real chicken parmesan and things like
So
that.
So it's your birthday. I know it's not technically your birthday, but it's your birthday, and you want the meal that you don't want to cook because you either one you don't know how to or it's too complex. What are you asking for your birthday dinner?
Well, I go out to San Gabriel Valley and in LA area and get Peking duck.
That is awesome. That's awesome. My birthday's not close enough, but it's close enough that I'm going to tell you what I'm asking for. Have you ever heard of kalsway?
No.
Kalsway is a Burmese dish. It's a complex curries from India, and then it's kind of an Asian twist to it with the
Oh,
ramen noodles, and they put an egg on top. It is to die for, and it's a pretty complex dish to make. It has all these different things that you're basically building the bowl. So I'll send you the recipe that I found that's the best, and I think you might like it. My five exit questions, Larry, are very consistent, and it's what I believe programs the person who is the guest. In other words, if your favorite is this, and your favorite is this, and your favorite is this, these are things that make you who you are. So these don't have to be long answers, but
sure.
I am always intrigued. What book changed your life?
Um, is As the Future Catches You by Juan Enriquez, um, which was 20 years ago, but it was kind of predictive of lots of things, particularly things in the medical world and the health world that we see now as, we accept as common, but were revolutionary back when I read it.
Will he write another book so we can see what the next 20 years are?
I don't know if he's ever written another book, but that's kind of the one that always sticks out in my head.
All right. What movie inspires you?
Godfather.
Yeah. Um, what was one of the most exciting movies that you wanted to have as a trailer on your? on your E network when you started?
Um, uh, Maybe the Howard Stern movie, Private Parts.
Wasn't that something?
Yeah, because we helped launch Howard's TV career and stuff like that, and I just always thought he was an amazing talent and stuff. I couldn't wait to see the movie.
So you've met him many times?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that is a trip of a dude, and man, he is so smart about navigating what I'll call the controversial entertainment.
that's for sure.
Yeah, most people, like you said, like the Russian thing, it's not about death; it's that you kill your career, and
Yeah.
he's always been smart about that. Um, what song gets you going? Who's a group you love a lot?
Um, well, I mean, going back to Beatles, of course. But now I listen to, I love Eminem and, kind of more modern stuff.
And you've met most of these people.
I met most, yeah.
That's pretty cool. Who's someone that you met that you really enjoyed meeting?
George Harrison, Beatles.
I got my mind set on you, baby.
You got it. It was amazing.
You ever meet Jeff Lynne?
Uh, no, no, never met Jeff Lynne.
He was the guy who produced George Harrison.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know who he is, but no, we never met.
Yeah, I've met a couple people that say Jeffrey Gitomer used to hang with Jeff Lynne. I said you got to get me connected to him because I think he's one of the most brilliant producers, not just a
Yeah.
musician. Um, who's someone you want to meet you haven't met?
Uh, well, unfortunately, most of them are not around anymore.
You're allowed to bring him back to life if you want.
You know, President Kennedy, probably.
That's pretty cool. And in the current world right now, you're pretty good. You've met almost everyone you want to and need to, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
All right. Who's your hero?
Uh, I don't know, maybe Buzz Aldrin.
Isn't he awesome?
Yeah, Buzz is amazing. He's still kicking, and um, you
Yeah,
know,
he's defied the odds his liver has. I mean,
uh, God, yeah. But yeah, probably Buzz. I mean, the thought of getting in that little thing and going to the moon is like mind-boggling to me.
it is. I don't usually slip something in, but I've never told this story, and I think you'll get a kick out of this. Can we do it real quick?
Sure.
I met Buzz Aldrin the first time, and I said, "Hey, can you hold a smile card? I'd like to take a picture of you." He goes, "Sure." And his publicist was next to him, and she goes, "What are you paying him?" And I said, "I'm not. I'm just acknowledging him." And she goes, "Put that card down, Buzz. Unless he's paying or we have some type of negotiation, it's got to go down." That was the only time that ever happened in my life, Larry. And
Wow.
and then he was at a Greg Reed type of event in LA for it was something to raise money for philanthropies. And I ran into him. He didn't remember me at all. I gave him the card. He goes, "Sure," like that. And it was never like, "Oh, I met you before at Harvard." But
Yeah.
that was an interesting story. But my last question for you, Larry, is what quote do you live by? I know you gave me a lot of secret recipes for success, but what quote do you live by?
I think it's, what I learned from Nick Nicholas was, in everything you do in life, you could be firm but fair. I mean, and I always look at that and the way I deal with that. Literally anybody doesn't make a difference from, a busboy in a restaurant to a CEO of a Fortune 500, is to realize that I want them to walk away going, maybe I didn't get all I want, but I think I was treated fairly.
Well, you've certainly lived life to the fullest, in my opinion, and I'm so excited that I got your book, that I got to know you better through your book, and that you accepted an invitation to be on the show, the Dr. Smiley Show. It will be put into a book of 365 people that are heart shaped people that are moving the world in the right direction. Thank you for being a fan, but most importantly, thank you for living. It is what it is to be a leader who causes smiles in the world.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Larry. Have a great day.
Bye.